Tony in California, pronouns are he, him, who has questions about evolution. So welcome, Tony. How are you?
Hey, what's up, Tony?
Hi, how are you guys?
All right.
I just have a question about the theory of evolution as a viable means to explain the current society that we have today. Is this even a question that, that one should posit? Is it?
You're more than welcome to. Yeah.
To answer the question.
It's not super related, but it's there. Like we could get into it. There's some things that kind of tie in.
I would say, and just briefly, because Forrest is going to know this better than I do anyway, but the concept behind, the model behind evolution by means of natural selection is a robust thing that doesn't have to just apply to biology. This is why others have called it Darwin's dangerous idea, and this notion that if we look at all of the factors that impact how something changes, because society changes and it's going to change based on what we're doing and everything else. But I would be very careful about conflating biological evolution with the evolution of societies, because the guiding factors in there are very, very different. And so people already have some really bad ideas about biological evolution where they're like, oh, it's about survival of the fittest. No, it's not. I mean, it's true that those that are most fit to pass on their genes are more likely to. And you can get into arguments about whether or not the selection pressures for evolution are selecting for things or selecting against things. And I think you can have that debate. But whether or not biological evolution is sufficient to explain modern society is an interesting puzzle, which I don't think has any bearing on whether or not, I don't really know, because it's like biological evolution could be true, and the fact that it's not a good explanation for modern society doesn't impact whether or not it's still true biologically.
Well, there's also there are things that you could tie in with biological evolution that go into society as well. If you're talking about like human biology, if you're talking about specifically, like there's different ideas and archaeological theories that come up with like why humans are the way they are, and why we built the world that we did. So those things kind of can play in, and those are all what we call biological anthropology. So studying the human animal and why we do what we do. That being said, I have no idea what you're actually asking, Tony. I'm so sorry. What did you want to talk about?
Yeah, try it again, Tony. My apologies.
I just wanted to know if biological evolution can explain societal evolution, or can be a viable means as to answering why certain groups within society do better than other groups within society, given their characteristics.
So
like recently we've had, things like Black Lives Matter coming up, and, raising questions of, systemic racism and all that stuff. I just want to know whether or not biological evolution, and I'm not trying to, come across as positing a racist theory, because I'm not.
Oh, no. I don't think so. I think those are actually really good points. Those are really good things to bring up. Yeah. So
because it
I'm
seems
gonna
like anybody trying to raise this question, it seems like people are like, "Well, maybe this guy is racist," like maybe this guy is
because
a social Darwinist or whatever.
We got it, Tony. We know you're not going down social Darwinism specifically. So let's address this.
You're absolutely right. There, a lot of times it gets really sticky because somebody tries to throw out social Darwinism, eugenics, whatever like that. But I get that's not where you're coming from. As far as like whether or not bioevolution is applicable to societal evolution, yes and no. There's different parts of it. But I'm really glad that you brought up BLM specifically, because when we look at like systemic racism, we look at the way that humans treat each other. And when we look at evolution as a guiding force for all this, what we're looking at, first of all, this is a fun thing for anybody to go dig into. There's a whole field called processual archaeological theory, which is just applying science to human culture and behavior, especially early human society, and like how these things came about. So rather than just saying, okay, we know that they had pots and the pots were made out of this and they ate these kind of plants, but that's all we can possibly know. Processual archaeological theory comes in with like principles of ecology and like why were they in the environment in this way and how did they live and how did they interact with other species or with other tribes. It's really fascinating stuff. So check it out. It's really cool. But when we look at these things, we can also start to weave in some psychology as well. And so one thing that we can see that humans evolved with that we're really, really, really good at is tribalism. We are super duper good at tribalism. There are some really cool experiments back in the 1970s, I want to say, by Henry Teifel, who's a social psychologist. And he would split people up into groups by totally arbitrary means. How many dots do you see on this screen? Okay, well, you guess too few dots and you guess too many dots. You go in these different directions. The toss of a coin. What kind of paintings do you like? The humans that were separated knew the completely arbitrary reasons they were separated. They understood completely arbitrary reasons they were separated. And then they would start playing games and immediately they would start discriminating against each other. And they would go out of their way to screw the other group over, even if it meant hurting themselves. And when you ask them, why would you do that? They would all say the same thing, because they're going to do that to me first. So I better do it to them before they get a chance to do it to me. And Teifel himself wrote in his publications that discriminatory behavior was shockingly easy to trigger, like disturbingly easy to trigger. Then when we look into neuroscience, we see the parts of our brain that handle things like empathy. For example, like the anterior cingulate gyrus, one of my favorite parts of the brain, like these parts that handle emotional empathy and like feeling for other people and connecting with other people, they don't work super well when you split somebody up along racial tribal lines, but they work better and better and better the more we start to unify these people, the more you start to see other races, other ethnicities, other religions, other political ideologies, the more you see these other people in your life and interact with them, the more your brain starts to see these people as people, because we're treating them now as part of my tribe, not these other people over here. There's other experiments as well with the insular cortex. The insular cortex is tucked in right between your parietal lobe and your temporal lobe right in here. And it handles disgust. If you think about eating rotten, nasty, rancid food, you feel sick to your stomach. That's your insular cortex working. But it also works with moral disgust. If you think about pedophilia, rape, genocide, and you feel every language in the world has a phrase like, I feel sick to my stomach about that behavior makes me sick, because it literally does. It's the same part of your brain doing it. So it's really easy then to get some xenophobic bullshit mixed in there and say, oh, these people eat bugs. That's really gross. They must be evil. And so we do have parts of our biology that evolved, tribalism and disgust and morality and empathy and all these things that made us more cohesive as small bands of apes living on the savannah. But now in the modern society, they tend to kind of become problematic as we get these, overblown racist ideologies, because we take these random emotions of stupid apes living in the grasslands and turn them into huge diverse societies of human beings. So all this is to say, there are a lot of biological principles, evolution included, that tie into society as we know it today. And it's really tricky to parse them out and not get into sociology and psychology. But the coolest parts of sociology and psychology also have to do with evolution too. So yeah, the answer to your question is yeah, for a long, yeah. Long answer for yes.
I have a couple things that I'd like to add, but we also got to move on to other callers because we only got like a few minutes left in the show.
Sorry.
I just like to exercise caution because in the same way that the weather can be a contributor to my ability to reproduce. Like if I'm cold or wet or whatever, I'm less likely to, be amorous. So there's a limited sense in which biological evolution can impact societal evolution because they're necessarily linked. Those things that contribute to an organism's survival are important. And so my survival is impacted by the social policies that we have. Birth control reduces pregnancies, and that's a social policy, which could be viewed as being in conflict with evolution because you're reducing pregnancies, but it could also be viewed as really significant to evolution because birth control also frees up some people to do more, which benefits everyone. There are people, we don't need necessarily everyone to have direct descendants for evolution to keep working for the system, because evolution isn't about the individual. It's about species. It's about large groups. Yeah. And so in recent years, I remember hearing people were like, oh, well, in the past, we didn't live that long. And so there's no motivation. There's no reason for old people. And what we've discovered is that grandparents have, in many cultures, a significant impact on biological evolution by being potentially extra caretakers that allow parents to do other things and changing the nature of who's able to reproduce and under what conditions. And so while grandparents aren't required for reproduction, they're often great, and sometimes they're not so good. So it's really complicated. And anybody who looks at biological evolution as merely changes in allele frequency over time is selling it short. And anyone who tries to expand it to be an all-encompassing thing is probably playing a little fast and loose. And so as far as I can tell, yes, it impacts societal evolution, and societal evolution impacts biological evolution, because we live in a dynamic, interwoven universe, and it's impossible to remove all the factors that contribute to both of them.
I'd also like to throw in, because of what you just said about society affecting us, very, very briefly, the past 200,000 years of human society has been trying to remove as many selection pressures from us as possible. There's a reason why you don't get eaten by a lion going out to work, but that also does change the trajectory of evolution, because evolution is always happening as long as there's reproduction happening. So we're actually seeing evolutionary trends in human populations today. For example, we're getting taller and taller because of our access to sufficient nutrition all the time. Our heads are getting bigger and bigger because of cesarean sections, and you no longer need to try to fit a watermelon out of a cervix the size of a quarter. There are populations that are getting bigger and bigger spleens because they swim. There are populations with bigger and bigger lungs because they live in the mountains. Like, there's still evolution going on, and the ways in which we live impact those today. And then evolution impacts our society, and then society impacts our evolution. And if you really want to get into it, there's a whole thing about tool building, which is freaking awesome, that I will talk about for 5 hours. So I'm not gonna, but if you look up like the evolution of tool making and how that actually impacted our evolution, and it kind of became the cyclical thing, freaking radical, dude.
Did that help, Tony?
It did. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I hope I just raised 10,000 more questions for you, because that's why it makes science so fun.
Yep. And when you start going through those other questions,
what is it?
Challenging your own ideas, and keep challenging your own perceptions, and trying to get to the truth, or what's more
Always.
reasonable, and what's more logical.
definitely.
So thank you
Always,
very much
every
for
day.
your time, Steve.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks for listening to me ramble, Tony.